The deck of a Liberty ship heaves under Paolo Russo's boots. February 1944, mid-Atlantic. The smell is diesel and vomit and unwashed wool. 300 Italian prisoners crammed below like cargo. Paolo grips the rail with hands that won't stop shaking, not from cold, though the spray cuts like glass, but from what Colonel Ferraro screamed the morning they surrendered in Tunisia. The Americans will string you from meat hooks. They will feed you to dogs alive. Better to die here than beg them for mercy. Below deck, men pray in whispers. Someone sobs into a blanket. Paolo closes his eyes and sees his mother's kitchen in Calabria, fried peppers, bread still warm, the smell of rosemary drying by the window. He expects he will never smell anything like that again. An American sailor walks past, young, maybe 20, clipboard tucked under one arm. He doesn't spit, doesn't laugh, just checks a door latch and moves on, boots echoing on steel. Paolo flinches anyway, muscle memory expecting the blow that doesn't come. Somewhere ahead, beyond the gray water and the destroyer escorts, lies Texas, or maybe hell. Paolo no longer knows if there's a difference. How do you live with kindness from the hands you were taught to hate? The surrender happened on a Tuesday. Paolo remembers because his squad had received Mass that Sunday. A field chaplain rushing through the sacrament, while British artillery walked closer through the hills. By Tuesday, the ammunition was gone. By Tuesday, Lieutenant Grimaldi had shot himself in his tent, rather than face capture. By Tuesday, Paolo and 62 other men stood in a ravine with their hands on their heads, while British soldiers zip-tied their wrists with practiced efficiency. No one spoke. Speaking felt like admitting it was real. The trucks came an hour later, American GMC 2.5s, engines growling, dust rising like a biblical plague. They were loaded without ceremony. Paolo's wrists went numb from the plastic ties. The truck bed smelled like oil and canvas and fear sweat. A corporal from Napoli whispered that the Americans would drive them into the desert and shoot them in irrigation ditches. Someone told him to shut up. No one told him he was wrong. The port at Bizerte was chaos. Thousands of prisoners, Italian, some German, penned in wire enclosures under the North African sun. Red Cross tents, Allied MPs with white armbands shouting orders no one understood. Paolo was sorted into a group, marched onto a dock, and herded up a gangway onto a ship that looked like it had been welded together in a hurry. The SS Charles Henderson Liberty ship, cargo hold converted to hold men instead of tanks. They were packed in rows of canvas bunks stacked 4 high, so tight you couldn't sit up without hitting the man above you. The air was thick, unbreathable. 1 porthole for every 50 men, a single bucket in the corner that overflowed by the second day. The smell became a physical thing, something you wore on your skin. Paolo tried to remember what his training officer had said about Americans. The officer had been a black shirt, a true believer, and he'd shown them photographs, propaganda photographs. Paolo understands now, but then they'd seemed real. Americans were monsters, sadists. They bombed hospitals for sport. They castrated prisoners and left them to bleed out in the sun. But the British soldiers who'd taken them hadn't done any of that. They'd been bored, mostly, professional. They'd checked for weapons, taken watches and pocket knives, offered cigarettes to anyone who asked. One of them had a Sicilian grandmother and spoke broken Italian, asking where everyone was from, nodding at familiar town names. Still, the British were one thing. The Americans were another. The Atlantic crossing took 11 days. The ship rolled in heavy swells. Men vomited until there was nothing left, then vomited bile. Rumors spread like fever. They were being taken to camps in the Arizona desert, where prisoners were worked to death in mines. They were being sold as slaves to American factories. They were being taken to a place called Alcatraz, a rock in the ocean where men went insane from isolation. Paolo didn't believe the rumors, but he didn't not believe them either. At night, when the ship quieted and the engines settled into a low drone, he thought about his family. His mother, who'd kissed his forehead the day he left and said nothing because there was nothing to say. His father, who'd shaken his hand like a business transaction and told him to honor the family name. His sister, Lucia, 16C, who sold cigarettes and flowers on the Naples dockside to help pay rent, who wrote him letters full of invented cheerfulness that couldn't hide the hunger underneath. What would he tell them? That he'd surrendered, that he was alive, that he was being shipped across an ocean to an enemy nation while they starved under Allied bombs. He tried to pray but couldn't find the words. The rosary his mother had given him was at the bottom of the Mediterranean, lost when his kit was abandoned during the retreat. On the 10th day, a rumor swept through the hold that they'd sighted land. Men pressed against the portholes, craning to see. Paolo caught a glimpse, distant and hazy. A coastline that looked nothing like Italy. Too flat, too green, wrong. On the 11th day, they docked. The hatches opened. Daylight flooded in, blinding after days of gloom. Paolo climbed the ladder with legs that barely worked, stumbled onto the deck, and sucked in air that didn't taste like shit and sweat. Norfolk, Virginia, February cold, but nothing like the cold of the Alps. The dock was organized chaos. Cranes unloading cargo, trucks idling in rows, MPs directing traffic with hand signals, and everywhere the smell of America. Diesel and fried food and something sweet he couldn't identify. They were formed into lines, counted again. An officer with a clipboard shouted orders in English. An interpreter translated into Italian, his accent strange, Neapolitan vowels flattened by American consonants. Paolo looked around for the meat hooks, the dogs, the sadists with knives. What he saw instead was a Red Cross nurse standing beside a water station, her uniform crisp and white, her face utterly bored as she filled tin cups and handed them to prisoners shuffling past. She looked like she was handing out water at a train station, not serving enemy combatants. Beyond the dock, visible through the chain-link fence, was a neighborhood, houses with painted shutters, a church steeple, a woman pushing a baby carriage, a mailman making his rounds. Normal life, impossible life. The man beside Paolo, a farm boy from Puglia, maybe 19, stared at the houses with an expression Paolo couldn't read. Then he said, quietly, almost to himself, "This doesn't look like the prison they warned us about." Paolo said nothing, but he thought, no, it doesn't. And that terrified him more than any propaganda ever had. The train ride took 3 days. Boxcars again, but different from the ship. These had windows, benches, enough room to stretch. Guards rode in the front car, visible but not oppressive. At stops, Red Cross volunteers handed out sandwiches wrapped in waxed paper. White bread, cheese, some kind of potted meat Paolo didn't recognize. It tasted like salt and fat and America. Through the window, the country scrolled past. Virginia forests, Tennessee mountains, the flat sprawl of Arkansas. Then Texas, endless and brown under a sky so big it made Paolo feel like an insect. No bomb craters, no ruined villages, no burned-out tanks, just space, untouched, impossible space. Camp Hereford appeared like a mirage, rows of white barracks stretching into distance, guard towers at each corner, a double fence of barbed wire with coils of razor wire between, a water tower painted with a single word, Hereford. The gates opened. The train stopped. Orders were shouted. The prisoners shuffled onto a gravel platform. Paolo's legs trembled, not from fear but from the strangeness of solid ground. He stood in formation while MPs counted them, checked manifests, conferred with clipboards. An officer appeared, a captain with wire-rimmed glasses. He spoke through an interpreter whose Italian was textbook perfect but emotionless. "You are prisoners of war of the United States Army. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will be fed, housed, and assigned work details. Escape attempts will be punished. Cooperation will be rewarded. Do you understand?" A murmur of assent. The captain nodded and walked away, already consulting another clipboard. That was it. No speeches, no threats, just bureaucracy. They were marched to a processing building. Inside, clerks sat at desks with typewriters, paper forms stacked in wire trays. The air smelled like ink and floor wax. Paolo stood in front of a desk where a sergeant with thinning hair looked up from a form. "Name?" The interpreter translated. Paolo answered. "Age?" 23. "Rank?" "Caporale, corporal." "Unit?" Paolo hesitated. 7th Infantry Regiment. The sergeant typed with 2 fingers, hunting and pecking. He asked about hometown, occupation before the war, education. He asked if Paolo could read and write. He asked about medical conditions. The questions were practical, clinical. There was no malice in them. That disturbed Paolo most, the indifference. He'd expected hatred. But the sergeant asked his questions the way a doctor asks about symptoms, checking boxes, moving to the next patient. When it was done, the sergeant handed Paolo a metal disc on a chain. Stamped into it, 31574 IT. Wear it at all times. It is your identification. Paolo slipped the chain over his neck. The metal was cold against his chest. Next came medical inspection. An army doctor with tired eyes checked teeth, eyes, ears. He looked for lice, for scabies, for TB. A prisoner ahead of Paolo had infected sores. The doctor frowned, made notes, and the man was led to the infirmary. Not roughly, just efficiently. When Paolo's turn came, the doctor pressed a stethoscope to his chest. Breathe. Paolo breathed. The doctor nodded and waved him on. No mockery, no cruelty, just process. Outside, they were told to strip. This was it, Paolo thought. This was where the humiliation began. But the guards simply pointed to folding chairs and told them to leave their clothes there. Then they were directed into another building, the shower room. Paolo stepped inside and stopped. White tiles on the walls, grey concrete on the floor. Overhead, metal pipes fitted with shower heads in neat rows, soap dispensers, drains. Everything was clean. An orderly turned a valve. Water hissed from the shower heads. Hot water. Steam began to rise. Men inched forward, uncertain. The first man under the spray gasped, not in pain, but in shock, and bent his head under the water. Paolo moved forward and stepped under a shower head. The heat soaked into his skin. It had been months since he'd felt hot water. In North Africa, they'd bathed in cold streams or not at all. Someone handed him soap. White, rectangular, smelling like lemon. He lathered his hands, his arms, his chest. Around him, men washed in silence. A few wept, quiet tears that mixed with the water and disappeared. Paolo thought, this is not mercy. This is infrastructure. They built this for themselves, and we are simply allowed to use it. After the showers, they were given rough olive-drab towels and led to another room. Piles of clothing waited. Blue denim shirts and trousers, stamped on the back with PW in white paint. Paolo dressed. The clothes smelled like detergent. They fit poorly, but they were whole. No lice, no holes. That evening, they were assigned to barracks, Building 14. Inside, rows of bunk beds, thin mattresses, wool blankets folded at the foot of each. A light bulb hung from the ceiling. The barracks smelled of fresh pine and disinfectant. Paolo chose a lower bunk near the wall. He lay down. The springs creaked. Through the window he could see across the compound. Other barracks, guard towers, the fence. Beyond that, nothing but Texas scrubland. From somewhere distant came the sound of a radio, swing music, bright and alien. Paolo closed his eyes. He thought, if this is the enemy's hate, why does it look more like order than revenge? He didn't have an answer, and that frightened him more than anything the propaganda had ever promised. Morning came with a whistle at 0600 hours. Paolo woke disoriented, forgetting for a moment where he was. Then he saw the PW stamped on the shirt of the man climbing down from the bunk above, and memory returned like cold water. Roll call in the compound. February dawn, frost on the ground, breath hanging in the air. The prisoners lined up in rows, while an MP with a clipboard walked down the line, counting. No names, just numbers. When he reached Paolo, the MP glanced at his tag and made a mark. After roll call, an interpreter addressed the group. Today they would be processed through sanitation and hygiene orientation. It was required by camp regulations and the Geneva Convention. Compliance was mandatory. They were marched across the compound toward a low concrete building with small windows. Rumors started immediately, whispered in Italian dialects that blended into a nervous hum. A man from Sardinia insisted it was a gas chamber. He'd heard about such things from a German prisoner. Another said no, the Americans were more creative. They'd use electricity or steam. Paolo said nothing. He watched the building approach and tried to prepare himself for whatever came next. At the entrance, the interpreter, a private whose name tag read Moretti, held up his hand. Inside is the latrine and hygiene facility. You will be shown how to use the equipment according to camp standards. There is nothing to fear. This is sanitation, not punishment. His tone was flat, bureaucratic, as if he'd given this speech 100 times. The door opened. They filed inside. The latrine was long and bright, lit by fluorescent tubes that hummed overhead. Along one wall, a row of white porcelain toilets, maybe 20 of them, each in its own partitioned stall with a wooden door. Along the opposite wall, sinks with mirrors above them, soap dispensers, and what looked like paper towel rolls in metal fixtures. Everything was clean, unnaturally clean. The floor was concrete, recently mopped, smelling faintly of bleach. There were no flies, no stench, no overflowing buckets or open trenches. Other prisoners stopped just inside the door, bunched together, staring. Private Moretti walked to the nearest toilet and gestured. "This is a flush toilet. You sit here." He pointed at the seat. "When finished, you pull this handle." He demonstrated. Water swirled in the bowl and vanished with a gurgling sound. The bowl refilled automatically. Silence. Someone coughed. Moretti continued, his voice taking on the exasperated patience of a man explaining the obvious. "So you use paper for cleaning. It is here on this roll. You throw the paper into the bowl, not on the floor. Then you flush. The water carries waste through pipes to a septic system. You do not need to empty anything. Do you understand?" More silence. Then an older man, a former railway worker from Genoa, stepped forward. He peered into the toilet bowl as if inspecting a piece of machinery. He pulled the flush handle, watched the water swirl, pulled it again. "Madonna," he whispered. Moretti moved to the sinks. "Here you wash your hands with soap and hot water. Hot and cold taps are marked. You dry your hands with paper towels from this dispenser. Used towels go in the waste bin. Any questions?" No one asked questions. They were too busy staring. Paolo approached one of the toilets slowly. He'd seen flush toilets before, in Rome, in government buildings, in the homes of wealthy families his father had worked for as a carpenter. But those had been luxuries, markers of status and modernity. This was a prison latrine. There were 20 of them. For prisoners, he thought of the latrines in the Italian army, open pits dug behind berms, swarming with flies in summer, frozen solid in winter. Officers had separate facilities, sometimes a wooden seat over a deeper pit, sometimes an actual privy with a door. But for conscripts, you squatted in the mud with 100 other men and tried not to think about disease. Here, every prisoner had porcelain. Moretti led them to the shower area, the same room from yesterday, but now he explained the procedures. Showers were mandatory twice weekly, more often if assigned to kitchen or medical duties. Soap was provided. Hot water was available for 10 minutes per session. Clean towels were distributed before each shower and collected after. "The camp has a laundry facility," Moretti continued. "You will receive clean clothing twice weekly. Soiled clothing goes in marked bins outside each barracks. Do not wash clothing in sinks or showers. This is a sanitation rule." Paolo tried to absorb the information, but his mind kept catching on details. Twice weekly. Clean clothing, twice weekly. In North Africa, he'd worn the same uniform for 2 months straight, until the fabric rotted from sweat and the seams split. They were shown the camp infirmary next, a separate building with actual hospital beds, medical equipment, a dispensary stocked with bandages and medicines. A doctor gave a brief lecture through Moretti about sick call procedures. If you were ill, you reported to the infirmary at 700. A medic would evaluate you. Serious cases would be treated. Malingering would be punished with loss of canteen privileges. The tour continued. The canteen, where prisoners could purchase items with coupons earned from work details. The library, stocked with Italian books donated by the Red Cross. The recreation yard with volleyball nets and bocce courts. Everything was organized, everything had rules, everything worked. That afternoon, back in the barracks, Paolo sat on his bunk and tried to process what he'd seen. Around him, men talked in low voices, comparing observations, testing theories. The railway worker from Genoa kept talking about the toilets. 20 of them, all porcelain, all functioning. Do you understand what that means? The infrastructure, the pipes, the water pressure, the sewage system. This camp is built better than most Italian towns. A younger man, barely 20, from a village in Abruzzo, said quietly, "My family has never had a toilet that flushes. We have an outhouse. In winter, you break ice in the bucket." No one responded. There was nothing to say. Paolo lay back on his bunk and stared at the ceiling. He thought about his home in Calabria, the outhouse behind the garden, the well where they drew water, the single cold water tap in the kitchen that his father had installed with pride, calling it modern. He thought, if this is what they give their prisoners, hot water, soap, porcelain toilets, clean sheets, what do their citizens have? And then, darker, what did we ever have? That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept seeing the row of white toilets, the chrome flush handles, the dispensers full of paper. He kept hearing the water swirl and vanish, carrying waste away to some invisible, functional system that just worked. It wasn't mercy. It wasn't kindness. It was civilization, and the Americans had built it into their prison camps as if anything less would be unthinkable. Paolo rolled over and pressed his face into the thin pillow. He thought of Colonel Ferraro's speech before the surrender. They are barbarians, savages. They will treat you like animals. But lying here in the dark, in a barracks with electric lights and a heating stove and a latrine with 20 porcelain toilets, Paolo understood. They weren't the barbarians. We were. The mess hall sat at the center of the camp, a long wooden building with screened windows and a pitched roof. Paolo had seen it from a distance during the tour, smoke rising from the chimney, the faint smell of cooking drifting across the compound. Now standing in line with 200 other prisoners as the lunch bell rang, he tried to prepare himself. The line moved forward. Boots shuffled on gravel. No one spoke. Inside, the smell hit like a physical force. Frying meat, onions, something sweet and yeasty. Paolo's stomach clenched. He hadn't smelled food like this since before the war. The doors opened. They filed inside. The mess hall was organized like a factory, long wooden tables with benches. At the far end, a serving line where American soldiers in stained aprons stood behind metal steam tables, trays stacked at the entrance, silverware in bins, real metal forks and spoons, not wooden sticks. An MP motioned them forward. Take a tray, move down the line. No stopping, no seconds until everyone's been served. Paolo picked up a tray. It was sectioned metal, still warm from washing. He moved down the line. The first server, a heavy-set black soldier with forearms like hams, dropped something onto Paolo's tray with a spatula, a hamburger, thick, glistening with grease, on a soft white bun. The meat was grey-brown, charred at the edges, and the smell of it made Paolo's mouth flood with saliva so suddenly it hurt. Next station, a white soldier, younger, with acne scars, piled fried potatoes onto the tray. Golden, crispy, salted. Steam rose from them. Next, green beans cooked soft with bits of bacon. Next, a square of cornbread, yellow and crumbling, with a pat of butter melting on top. Last station, beverages. A black soldier with sergeant stripes held up a glass bottle, brown, beaded with condensation. Coke or water? Paolo didn't understand. The man shook the bottle. Liquid sloshed inside. Coca-Cola. Paolo nodded, not knowing what he was agreeing to. The bottle was placed on his tray. He moved toward the tables, tray in both hands, staring down at the food. He found a seat at the end of a bench, set the tray down carefully, and sat. Around him, other prisoners were doing the same. Some were already eating. Some sat frozen, staring at their trays as if they'd been handed something obscene. Paolo looked at the hamburger. He picked it up. It was warm, heavy, the bun soft between his fingers. He raised it to his mouth and bit. Fat exploded on his tongue. Juice ran down his chin. The meat was rich, dense, salted, smoky. The bun dissolved into sweetness. He chewed slowly, eyes closed, and something in his chest cracked open. He thought of his mother's kitchen, Sunday lunch after Mass, thin vegetable soup. A piece of sausage divided among 5 people, bread made from chestnut flour because wheat was too expensive, His mother always gave him her portion of meat, claiming she wasn't hungry. He opened his eyes. Tears blurred his vision. Across the table, the railway worker from Genoa was weeping openly, hamburger clutched in both hands, grease on his fingers. Beside him, a boy from Sicily stared at his tray and whispered, "Gesù Cristo." Paolo set the hamburger down and picked up the bottle of Coca-Cola. He twisted the cap. It hissed, released, and raised it to his lips. Sweetness, cold, fizzing, impossibly sweet, like nothing he'd ever tasted. Sugar and bubbles and something chemical and wonderful. He drank half the bottle in 3 swallows, gasped, and set it down. His hands were shaking. He forced himself to eat slowly. The potatoes, salty, crispy, rich with oil. The cornbread, sweet and crumbling. The butter turning it into something that tasted like cake. The green beans, soft, fatty from the bacon, more meat than he'd seen in a month. He finished everything. Wiped the tray with the last piece of cornbread, drank the rest of the Coca-Cola. Then he sat, tray empty, and felt the weight of what he'd just done. Around him, the mess hall hummed with the sound of men eating. Some were silent. Some whispered to each other. A few laughed, short, shocked bursts of laughter that sounded like sobs. Paolo thought of his sister Lucia, 16 years old, selling cigarettes and flowers on the Naples dockside. He'd received a letter from her 2 weeks before the surrender. She wrote about their mother boiling dandelion greens for dinner, about their neighbor's daughter who died from pneumonia because there was no medicine, about the children who followed Allied soldiers begging for food scraps. And here he was, a prisoner, eating hamburger and fried potatoes and drinking Coca-Cola. The man beside him, a former shopkeeper from Firenze, pushed his tray away, half the food still uneaten. "I can't," he said. His voice was hoarse. "I can't eat this." "Why not?" "Because my wife is starving. My children are starving, and I'm sitting here eating better than I've eaten in 5 years. He covered his face with his hands. "What kind of man does that make me?" Paolo had no answer. That night, lying in his bunk, he couldn't stop thinking about the hamburger, the taste of it, the weight, the grease on his fingers, the way the fat had coated his tongue and made him remember what richness tasted like. He thought of his father, who'd voted for Mussolini in 1924 because Mussolini promised order and dignity and a return to Roman greatness. He thought of the propaganda posters that showed Italian soldiers as strong and noble, fighting for civilization against barbarism. He thought of the toilet with the chrome handle, the hot shower, the clean sheets, the hamburger. And he understood, lying there in the dark, that the enemy hadn't needed to torture him, hadn't needed to beat him or starve him or humiliate him. They'd broken him with a hamburger and a bottle of Coca-Cola. They'd broken him by feeding him better than his own government ever had, by treating him with the simple efficiency of a system that worked, by showing him, not with words, but with porcelain and plumbing and ground beef, that everything he'd been told was a lie. The propaganda had promised him that Americans were savages. Instead, they'd shown him that his own country was the one that had treated him like an animal, and that truth was harder to carry than any beating could ever be. He turned his face to the wall and wept silently, so the others wouldn't hear. Spring came to the Texas Panhandle slowly. March winds carried dust across the compound. By April, wildflowers appeared beyond the fence, bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush turning the scrubland purple and orange. The camp settled into rhythm. Wake at 600, roll call, breakfast, work details at 7:30, lunch at noon, more work until 1700, dinner, free time until lights out at 2200. Paolo was assigned to the camp garden, 2 acres behind the mess hall where prisoners grew vegetables for the kitchen, tomatoes, peppers, squash, green beans. The work was simple, almost meditative, digging, planting, watering. The soil was drier than Calabria, but it still smelled like earth and possibility. He worked alongside a dozen other men. They didn't talk much at first, but gradually silence gave way to small conversations. "Where are you from? What did you do before? Do you have family?" The guard assigned to the garden was Corporal Dixon, tall, thin, maybe 30, with a farmer's tan. He mostly left them alone, sitting in the shade reading westerns and smoking hand-rolled cigarettes. Once a week he'd walk the rows, checking progress, nodding approval. He spoke no Italian, they spoke no English. It worked. Work details came with pay. 10 cents per day in camp coupons. The coupons could be spent at the canteen, chocolate bars, chewing gum, cigarettes, soap, writing paper. Paolo saved his coupons for 2 weeks, then bought a Hershey bar, Lucky Strikes, and writing paper. That evening he tried to write to his sister, "Cara Lucia, I am alive and well. I am in America, in Texas. Do not worry for me. I am fed and safe. I think of you and Mama every day." He stopped. What else could he say? That he showered in hot water, that he ate meat every day. She would think he was lying. He signed it, sealed it, gave it to the mail clerk the next morning. 6 weeks, maybe more, if it arrived at all. The weeks blurred. Garden work, meals, letters sent into silence, no replies coming back. Red Cross deliveries brought Italian books. Paolo read I Promessi Sposi again, and a battered Dante someone had left in the barracks. Language classes started in May. An Italian-American sergeant taught basic English twice a week. Paolo learned, "Hello, thank you, please, water, food, work." Simple words. The sergeant was patient, never mocking, just correcting accents and moving on. One evening in late May, Dixon appeared with a camera. He gestured to Paolo and 2 others, pointed at the tomato plants, and mimed taking a picture. They stood, uncertain, while he snapped the photo. Then Dixon pulled a photograph from his shirt pocket, black and white, creased. A woman and 2 children in front of a farmhouse, the woman smiling, the children squinting into the sun. Dixon pointed at the photo, then at himself. Family. Paolo understood. He nodded. Dixon smiled, small, brief, and tucked the photo away. The moment passed. Dixon walked back to his spot in the shade, but something had shifted. The guard wasn't just a uniform anymore. He was a man with a photograph of his children. A man who'd left a farm to watch Italian prisoners grow tomatoes. Paolo thought about that photo for days. One Sunday after Mass, services held by a Catholic chaplain who spoke mediocre Italian, Paolo sat in the shade with the railway worker from Genoa, smoking Lucky Strikes. "Have you noticed," the railway worker said, "that the guards don't hate us?" Paolo nodded. "They don't care. We're a job. They watch us the way you'd watch livestock. Not because they want to hurt us, just because someone has to." "Is that better or worse?" Paolo asked. "I don't know, but it makes it harder." "Harder how?" "To hold on to the hate, to remember we're supposed to be enemies." Paolo smoked and said nothing. The man was right. It was easier to hate someone who hated you back. But this bureaucratic indifference, this routine kindness that wasn't really kindness but just policy, it eroded something. That night, Paolo thought about Dixon's photograph, about the woman and children, about the farm Dixon had left behind. He thought, if we survive this war, what will I tell my children about the people I was taught to hate? The question stayed with him, growing heavier with every meal, every shower, every day that passed in ordinary safety. The letter arrived in July. Paolo's name was called during evening mail distribution, a rare event that made men look up from card games and conversations. He took the thin envelope from the clerk, saw his sister's handwriting, and walked outside to read it alone. He sat on the steps of the barracks. His hands shook as he opened it. "Caro Paolo, your letter took 2 months to reach us. Mama cried when we received it. She thought you were dead. We all did. Things are very bad here. The bombing continues. Our building lost the top floor in May. Signora Benedetti and her son were killed. We live in the cellar now. There is no glass left in any windows. Mama covers the frames with cardboard. Food is impossible. We eat once a day if we are lucky. Bread is 50 lire when you can find it. Mama sold her wedding ring. I still sell cigarettes, but the soldiers have moved north and there is no one to buy from me anymore. Lucia is very sick. She has a cough that will not stop. The doctor wants 200 lire just to see her. We do not have it. Mama boils pine needles to make tea. It does not help. I am glad you are safe. Do not worry about us. God will provide. Your sister." Lucia. Paolo read it twice, then folded it carefully and sat staring at the compound fence while the sun set and turned the sky orange and purple. That evening in the mess hall, he was served pot roast with carrots and potatoes, fresh bread with butter, apple cobbler for dessert. He looked at the tray and couldn't pick up his fork. The railway worker sat across from him, not hungry. "My sister is starving," Paolo said quietly. "My other sister is dying from pneumonia, and I'm being served pot roast." The railway worker set down his fork. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. Paolo forced himself to eat, not because he wanted to, but because not eating would be wasteful, and waste felt like an additional sin. He chewed mechanically, tasting nothing, and thought about Lucia, the younger one, the sick one, lying in a cellar coughing while he sat in a heated mess hall eating meat and cobbler. Letters arrived more frequently after that. His mother wrote once, in careful script that looked shaky, "We are managing. Do not worry. Pray for us." Between the lines, Paolo read hunger and fear and the slow collapse of everything familiar. Other prisoners received similar letters: bombed homes, missing relatives, cities occupied and reoccupied. The war was turning. Everyone knew it, but the turning was grinding their families beneath its wheels. In the barracks at night, men read letters aloud to those who couldn't read well. A man from Napoli learned his father had died in a British air raid. A Sicilian boy discovered his village had been shelled by American artillery during the invasion. They wept, or sat in silence, or went outside to smoke and stare at nothing. The contradiction deepened. They lived behind barbed wire, but they were fed, clothed, safe, warm. Their families lived in freedom, but they starved under bombs and occupation. Arguments started. Late at night, when the lights were out and exhaustion made men reckless with words. "Dad, we should be there," someone would say. "We should be fighting." "Fighting for what?" another would answer. "For Mussolini, he's gone. For the king, he fled to the Allies. For the Germans, they're occupying us now. For Italy, for honor." There is no honor in dying for a lost cause. There is no honor in eating American food while our mothers starve. The arguments went in circles. Some men still clung to what they'd been taught: duty, sacrifice, the nobility of dying for the homeland. Others had stopped believing. They'd seen too much, eaten too well, been treated too fairly to pretend anymore. Paolo stayed out of the arguments. He didn't know what he believed. Both sides seemed right. Both sides seemed wrong. In August, a Red Cross inspector arrived, a Swiss official with a clipboard and a translator. He conducted interviews in the recreation hall, asking questions through the translator while taking notes. "Are you treated according to Geneva Convention standards?" "Yes." "Are you beaten or abused?" "No." "Do you receive adequate food and medical care?" "Yes." "Do you have complaints about your conditions?" Paolo hesitated. The truth was no. He had no complaints. The camp was clean, organized, fair. He was treated better here than he'd been treated in the Italian army, but saying that felt like treason. "No complaints," he said finally. The inspector made a note and moved on to the next man. That night, Paolo lay in his bunk and thought about the interview. He'd told the truth. The Americans followed the rules. They fed him, housed him, gave him medical care and hot showers and work that wasn't brutal. His own government had done none of those things. Had sent him to North Africa with inadequate supplies, corrupt officers, and propaganda instead of training. Had told him to die rather than surrender. Had built an empire on speeches and parades while its soldiers ate rotten food and died of preventable diseases. And now he was here, admitting to a Swiss inspector that his captors treated him well while his family lived in ruins. He thought, "We admit our enemy followed rules our own leaders ignored." The thought was bitter, shameful, true. He turned his face to the wall and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. He kept seeing his sister's handwriting, shaky and desperate, kept tasting pot roast and cobbler, kept thinking about the porcelain toilets and the hot showers, and the guard with the photograph of his children. Outside, the camp was quiet. Guard towers lit, fence wire humming faintly in the wind. Paolo thought, "We live like soldiers while our children live like ghosts." And he understood, lying there in the dark, that this was the deepest wound of all, not the capture, not the defeat, but the realization that mercy could come from the enemy's hands while cruelty came from your own. The rumor started in late April 1945. Germany was collapsing. Berlin surrounded. Hitler, dead or dying. Whispers spread through the camp. Men clustering after work details, trading scraps overheard from guards or glimpsed in newspaper headlines. Then, on May 8th, the camp loudspeakers crackled during evening roll call, an announcement in English, then Italian. The war in Europe has ended. Germany has surrendered unconditionally. Hostilities have ceased. Silence. Paolo stood in formation and felt nothing. Around him, 300 men stood equally still. No cheers. No celebration. Just silence. The war was over. They had lost, and they were still here, behind wire, alive. That night, the barracks filled with crying. Some men wept with relief, others with shame. A few sat hollow-eyed, saying nothing. Paolo lay on his back staring at the ceiling, trying to feel something, anything. But there was only numbness. He thought, I survived. I surrendered, and I survived. And I did not die as they said I should. Was that cowardice or luck? He didn't know. More news filtered through. Mussolini executed. His body hung upside down in Milan. Italy split between Allied occupation and German resistance. Cities destroyed, hundreds of thousands dead. The guards behaved strangely, quieter, less casual. Some seemed relieved, others looked uncomfortable, as if guarding defeated men now felt awkward. Preparations for repatriation began in June. Medical examinations, paperwork. Lists organized by region. Paolo's turn came on a Tuesday. A board lieutenant checked his file. Next of kin in Italy. My mother and sisters, Naples. Political affiliations. No. A lie everyone told, everyone accepted. You'll be repatriated through Naples, August or September. You'll receive clothing, documents, discharge papers. Questions. Paolo shook his head. He was going home, to a home that no longer existed. In July, the first groups left. Prisoners assembled at dawn, duffel bags packed, wearing American surplus uniforms dyed and relabeled. They boarded buses to trains to ships. Paolo watched them go and felt strange reluctance. Here, he knew the routine. Here was order and safety. Out there was chaos. His turn came in early August. He packed his few possessions, writing paper, a rosary, an Italian-English dictionary. He folded his sister's letters and placed them in his breast pocket. The morning of departure, he walked through the camp one last time. Past the garden, past the mess hall, past the latrine with its 20 porcelain toilets. He stood outside the garden fence. The tomato plants were heavy with unpicked fruit, rotting in August heat. Footsteps behind him. He turned. Dixon, out of uniform, wearing civilian clothes, denim and a faded work shirt, carrying a canvas bag. They looked at each other. Dixon seemed older, or maybe just tired. Dixon reached into the bag and pulled out the photograph, his wife and children. He held it out to Paolo. Paolo took it, confused. Dixon pointed at the photo, then at Paolo, then made a writing gesture. Paolo understood. He pulled out his pencil and dictionary, wrote his mother's address in Naples on a blank page, tore it out, and handed it to Dixon. Dixon folded it, tucked it in his pocket. Then he reached out his hand. Paolo shook it. Dixon's grip was firm, calloused. Dixon said something in English, too fast to catch, but the tone was clear. Good luck. Go home. Paolo nodded. Dixon picked up his bag and walked toward the gate. Paolo stood holding the photograph. A woman and 2 children. A farmhouse. Somewhere in America, a family waited for Dixon. He placed the photograph carefully in his pocket next to his sister's letters. 2 hours later, Bastabiu train, then after 3 days a ship in New York Harbor. A transport vessel crowded with repatriated prisoners heading east across the Atlantic. Paolo stood on deck as the American coastline disappeared. The Statue of Liberty receded. Manhattan's skyline, untouched by bombs, vanished last. He thought about Dixon, about hamburgers and toilets and the camp that had been cleaner than anywhere he'd lived before the war. He thought, they reminded me I was still human, and I will carry that for the rest of my life. The ship's horn sounded. America disappeared behind them, and ahead lay only open water and whatever remained of home. The ship docked in Naples on September 12, 1945. Morning light, hazy and yellow. Paolo stood at the rail with 200 other repatriated prisoners and looked at the city he'd left 3 years before. It wasn't there anymore. The waterfront was skeletal. Buildings collapsed into rubble. Cranes rusted in the harbor. Ships half sunk, tilted at obscene angles, masts jutting from the water like broken bones. The smell hit him before they disembarked. Sewage, rot, salt and something else. Desperation, maybe. Hunger. They walked down the gangway carrying duffel bags and discharge papers. No one was waiting, no ceremony, no welcome. Just a British officer with a clipboard checking names, stamping documents, waving them through. Paolo walked into Naples and didn't recognize it. The streets were rubble and craters, buildings gutted, walls standing without roofs, windows empty and black. Children everywhere, thin, filthy, barefoot, swarming around Allied soldiers begging for chocolate or cigarettes. Women stood in doorways with painted faces and dead eyes. Old men sat on broken stones staring at nothing. He asked directions 3 times before finding his street. The building was half collapsed. The top 2 floors were gone, sheared away by bombs. The ground floor and cellar remained, the entrance blocked by a sheet of corrugated metal. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again. The metal scraped aside. His mother appeared. She was 60 but looked 80, hair white, face gaunt, eyes sunken. She wore a black dress that hung on her like a shroud. She stared at him without recognition. "Mamma," he said, "sono io, Paolo." Her hand went to her mouth. She made a sound, half sob, half gasp, and reached for him. He dropped his bag and held her. She weighed nothing, bones and cloth. She shook against him, crying, saying his name over and over. Inside, the cellar was dark and damp. Cardboard covered the window frames. A single candle burned on an upturned crate. His sister Lucia sat on a mattress on the floor, the older Lucia, the one who sold cigarettes. She looked up and started crying. The younger Lucia, the sick one, was gone, dead in July. Pneumonia, buried in a mass grave outside the city. His mother told him this in flat-out exhausted sentences while Lucia, the elder, clung to his arm and wept. They had nothing. The furniture was gone, sold or burned for heat. The stove didn't work. They cooked over a campfire in the courtyard when they had food to cook, which wasn't often. They lived on relief rations from the Allies, thin soup, hard bread, occasional tins of meat. Paolo opened his duffel bag. Inside, 2 changes of American surplus clothing, a blanket, a bar of soap, a tin of coffee, 3 Hershey bars he'd saved, and $20 in occupation scrip. He gave them everything. His mother held the soap and started crying again. Lucia opened a Hershey bar with shaking hands, broke off a piece and put it in her mouth. She closed her eyes. That night, Paolo lay on the floor next to his sister and stared at the ceiling. The cellar smelled like mold and urine. Rats scratched in the walls. Outside, someone was screaming, drunk or mad or dying, impossible to tell. He thought about the barracks in Texas, the clean sheets, the electric lights, the potbelly stove, the mess hall with its trays of pot roast and cornbread. He thought about the latrine, 20 porcelain toilets, hot showers, soap in abundance. He thought about Dixon's photograph, the woman smiling, the children squinting into the sun, the farmhouse in Kansas or Oklahoma, untouched whole. And he understood. The propaganda had promised him that surrender meant torture and death, but the toilets and showers taught him that torture was what he'd left behind. The threat of starvation prepared him for hell, but the hamburgers and Coca-Cola showed him that hell was here, in freedom, under the open sky, in the ruins of his own country. The lessons in hate prepared him to dehumanize the enemy. But the guard's photograph reminded him that humanity didn't stop at borders or uniforms or languages. The war hadn't ended when the guns stopped. It had ended the moment he accepted that hamburger, the moment he flushed that toilet, the moment he understood that the enemy's mercy was real and his own leader's cruelty was real, and he could never unsee either truth. He thought, "The enemy I feared became the mirror that showed me my own humanity." In the months that followed, Paolo found work on the docks, hauling cargo for Allied ships. The pay was terrible. The work was brutal, but it was work. He never spoke about Texas. When other men, veterans and survivors, traded stories of the war, he stayed silent. How could he explain? How could he tell them he'd eaten better as a prisoner than they had as soldiers? That the enemy had treated him with more dignity than his own army ever had? He couldn't, so he didn't. But he kept Dixon's photograph, carried it in his pocket, creased and fading, for the rest of his life. Years later, after the rebuilding, after the marriage, after the children, his son would ask him about the war. Paolo would pull out the photograph and tell him about a guard in Texas who'd shown him a picture of his family, about hamburgers that tasted like guilt, about toilets that flushed, about the unbearable weight of being treated with kindness by people he'd been taught to hate. "The war taught me," Paolo would say, "that mercy is harder to carry than hatred, because hatred asks nothing of you, but kindness. Kindness demands that you remain human." His son would ask, "Did you hate them, the Americans?" And Paolo would answer, "I tried to, but they wouldn't let me."